The restaurant's hush was sudden, complete, and unsettling. Wine glasses paused midair, forks hovered just inches from lips, and the soft jazz piano slipped into silence mid-note. Alabaster walls and gold trim reflected the frozen tension as every head turned toward the corner table, the one reserved for Manhattan's most powerful. There, a billionaire in a crisp navy suit leaned forward, his voice freshly fallen like thunder, having just berated the young black waitress standing before him. Her face was unreadable, her hands still at her sides, steady despite the sting in her ears. She didn't flinch, didn't stammer, didn't retreat. Instead, after a beat of unbearable silence, she looked him directly in the eye. One sentence. That's all it took. 7 words that rang out cleaner and sharper than any crystal in the room. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. Diners forgot their filet mignon. Staff held their breath. Something had changed, not just in the air, but in the very atmosphere of what this space had always represented. It wasn't just about food or money anymore. It was about dignity, and she had just reminded everyone in that room what it looked like. Zaria Miles was 26, with eyes that had seen more than her age should allow, and a voice she rarely used outside of necessity. Born and raised in Newark, she'd grown up learning how to stretch a dollar, how to keep her head down, and how to keep moving forward no matter how loud the world tried to silence her. By day, she taught dance to kids at a neighborhood rec center, pouring her soul into choreographing routines that made them feel like stars. By night, she wore a pressed black apron and carried plates through the polished chaos of Alouette, one of Manhattan's most elite dining rooms. She wasn't chasing dreams anymore. Not really. She was chasing rent, stability, and the quiet hope of keeping her little brother in school. She never expected kindness from her job. She expected sharp glances, long hours, and the occasional patron who couldn't be bothered to look her in the eye. But she showed up anyway, hair neatly tied, shoes polished, voice clear and polite, because she knew how to survive. And that night, survival looked like service with a smile. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was how close she was to snapping. Victor Langford didn't need an introduction. Everyone at Alouette recognized him the second he stepped through the door, flanked by bodyguards dressed like high-end furniture, meant to blend in, but impossible to ignore. Langford was the kind of billionaire whose face lived on magazine covers and tech blogs, known for turning obscure software into global empires and boardroom meetings into battlefield wins. He didn't smile, not even out of habit. His tailored gray suit sat on his broad frame like armor, and his watch was a quiet reminder that his time was worth more than most people's annual salary. The maitre d' greeted him with a bowed head, already trembling with the weight of unspoken expectations. Langford didn't speak to staff unless he was giving instructions or expressing dissatisfaction, and he had a reputation for turning minor inconveniences into career-ending moments. When he chose to dine in public, it wasn't for the ambiance or cuisine. It was to remind the world that he could own any room he entered. His presence sent a ripple through the dining floor. Servers adjusted their ties. The kitchen went silent. No one wanted to be noticed by Victor Langford, unless they were afraid of being remembered. Victor Langford didn't need an introduction. Everyone at Alouette recognized him the second he stepped through the door, flanked by bodyguards dressed like high-end furniture. Meant to blend in, but impossible to ignore. Langford was the kind of billionaire whose face lived on magazine covers and tech blogs, known for turning obscure software into global empires and boardroom meetings into battlefield wins. He didn't smile, not even out of habit. His tailored gray suit sat on his broad frame like armor, and his watch was a quiet reminder that his time was worth more than most people's annual salary. The maitre d' greeted him with a bowed head, already trembling with the weight of unspoken expectations. Langford didn't speak to staff unless he was giving instructions or expressing dissatisfaction, and he had a reputation for turning minor inconveniences into career-ending moments. When he chose to dine in public, it wasn't for the ambiance or cuisine. It was to remind the world that he could own any room he entered. His presence sent a ripple through the dining floor. Servers adjusted their ties. The kitchen went silent. No one wanted to be noticed by Victor Langford, unless they were afraid of being remembered. The night had been unfolding like any other. Linen napkins folded with precision, champagne bubbling softly at the VIP tables, and the low hum of conversations blending into the notes of a jazz trio near the bar. Zarya had just delivered dessert to a quiet couple celebrating their anniversary when the ripple came. Jordan, the server assigned to Langford's table, slipped in the hallway near the kitchen, his tray of wine glasses crashing to the ground like an alarm bell. The staff froze. He couldn't walk. Without hesitation, the manager turned to Zarya and gave her a sharp nod. She didn't have time to panic. In seconds, she adjusted her apron, grabbed a fresh order pad, and crossed the dining floor toward table 1. Her heart pounded, but her face gave nothing away. She had served difficult guests before, celebrities, CEOs, critics. But Langford was different. He didn't look up when she greeted him, didn't acknowledge her voice, just muttered about wine and waved his hand like she was background noise. She kept her tone polite and steady, suggesting a vintage Syrah that the sommelier had personally recommended. Langford didn't care. "Bring it," he said flatly, still glued to his phone. Zarya nodded, turned, and walked toward the cellar. The entire room had shifted. It wasn't just another high-stakes table now. It was a test, and the next few minutes would determine whether this night ended quietly or exploded into something unforgettable. Zarya returned with the bottle cradled in her arm like it was made of glass and consequence. She presented it label forward, just as she'd been trained, but Langford barely glanced before waving dismissively. "Pour." She did, smooth and steady, her hand like a metronome. He took a sip, gave a grunt of approval that bordered on insult, then pointed at the menu without looking up. "Wagyu, rare, truffle mash, sauce on the side, and make it quick." No pleasantries, no eye contact, just a string of clipped commands. Zarya jotted it down and confirmed the details with practiced calm, but internally her nerves twisted tighter. In the kitchen, she relayed the order to the chef, adding Langford's edits like sacred scripture. The kitchen staff moved with precision. Everyone understood the stakes. Returning to the floor, Zarya resumed her other tables, juggling laughter, wine refills, and polite conversation while the minutes ticked down. At one point, she glanced toward Langford's table. He was staring blankly at his phone, drumming his fingers, jaw set in mild irritation. He hadn't been waiting long, but men like him didn't measure time in minutes. They measured it in control. When the dish was finally plated to perfection, rare, no garnish, sauce on the side, she delivered it with quiet efficiency. Langford didn't thank her. He simply cut into the steak, tasted it, then stopped. His fork dropped. His expression changed. And for the first time that evening, he raised his eyes to look at her directly. Something was coming, and Zarya felt it like a storm on the skin. Zarya stood just beyond the table's edge, hands folded behind her back, watching Langford chew like he was evaluating more than just the food. Her heart thudded beneath her neatly pressed uniform, but her face held steady. She'd learned early how to mask discomfort, how to make herself invisible without vanishing. Still, something inside her was fraying. Every clipped demand, every dismissive gesture had chipped away at the wall she kept so carefully built. This job wasn't just a paycheck. It was her lifeline. Her little brother's tutoring, her mom's prescription refills, the overdue electric bill. It all hung on these shifts. And Langford, sitting there like he owned not just the table but the air around it, reminded her of every power-tripping man who had ever treated her like less. But this was more than anger. It was exhausting. Exhaustion from having to smile through disrespect, from pretending that people like him didn't still see her as a disposable part of their night. She glanced at the wine glass in his hand, half full, his fingers tapping it like a countdown. In that tiny moment, Zarya realized she wasn't afraid of him. Not really. What scared her was what might happen if she finally stopped swallowing her pride. If she said what she really thought, that line she'd never crossed before, it suddenly didn't feel as far away. And somewhere deep down, something steady and quiet began to stir. Langford pushed his plate forward with a clatter that made nearby diners glance up. His voice followed, sharp, loud, deliberate. "Is this a joke? I said rare, not raw." The words cut through the gentle murmur of the dining room like a blade. Zarya stepped forward, instinctively reaching to take the plate. "I'm sorry to hear that, sir. I'll have it." He cut her off. "Don't bother with excuses. This is supposed to be the best restaurant in the city, and they can't even cook a steak, right? He turned his voice up a notch, just loud enough to ensure people at the surrounding tables could hear. I'm paying top dollar for amateur hour? The atmosphere shifted. Conversations quieted. A few servers froze mid-step. Zarya kept her eyes on the plate, her fingers tightening around the rim as she lifted it. I'll speak with the kitchen right away, she said evenly. Oh, you'll speak with someone, he scoffed, gesturing toward the maître d' like he was calling over a valet. Let's get a manager out here too. I want to know how someone like you ends up serving at a place like this. That word, someone like you, lingered in the air, heavier than anything else he had said. Zarya paused. Her face didn't change, but her pulse thundered in her ears. The room went silent. Even the pianist, mid-chord, faltered into stillness. The maitre d' arrived quickly, murmuring apologies, hands wringing as he tried to diffuse the scene. But Langford wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on Zarya like she was a problem that hadn't yet been solved. This level of incompetence is unacceptable, he declared. I've built companies. I've fired people for less than this. Every table in earshot had turned toward them now. Zarya stood still. Years of swallowing pride had brought her to this moment, and all at once she felt the weight lift. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze and said, clearly, calmly, "You bought the room, sir. Not our respect." The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was seismic. For a long moment, no one moved. The words just sat there, pulsing in the space between them. Langford's jaw clenched. His eyes narrowed as if trying to decide whether to laugh or destroy her. The maitre d' looked like he might faint. A few diners exchanged wide-eyed glances. Someone near the bar whispered, "Did she just say that?" Zarya didn't budge. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply stood there with the kind of stillness that dared anyone to push her further. Langford shoved back from the table, his chair scraping harshly across the floor. "Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" he growled. "I could end your job, this restaurant, everything, with a single call." Zarya blinked once. "Maybe," she said softly, "but you still can't buy what you think you're owed." A ripple of quiet spread through the room. A few people actually smiled. Langford turned to the maitre d', who was already sweating through his collar, and barked for the check. But before the man could respond, a guest at a nearby table began clapping. Just once, slow and deliberate. Then another joined. Then another. In seconds, the dining room echoed with soft applause. Zarya didn't acknowledge it. She simply turned, walked to the kitchen doors, and disappeared behind them. Back there, everything was still in motion. Tickets printing, pans clattering, the sous chef shouting orders. But the staff had heard it too. One of the line cooks offered her a slow nod. "About time someone said it," he muttered. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear. From release. For the first time in years, she hadn't held it in. She had said what she meant, and the sky didn't fall. In fact, something had shifted. Not just for her, for everyone who'd ever been talked down to, dressed up to be invisible, and told to stay silent. Something real had cracked open. By morning, the moment had 1 million views. Someone at table 7 had caught the whole exchange on their phone. Langford's rant, the tension, Zarya's calm voice cutting through it like a razor. The clip spread like wildfire. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. News anchors played it on loop. "You bought the room, sir. Not our respect." That line became a rallying cry. People stitched reactions, shared stories, and flooded the comments with praise. Baristas, retail clerks, hotel staff, anyone who had ever smiled through condescension felt seen. Local news showed up at the restaurant. National outlets weren't far behind. Alouette's phone rang nonstop. Some calls from customers wanting reservations. Others from organizations offering support. The restaurant's official statement came by noon. A firm backing of their staff and a clear message that dignity was not optional, no matter the size of a guest's bank account. Zarya stayed quiet. She didn't tweet. She didn't post. She just kept showing up for her shifts, walking past the reporters without breaking stride. Inside, though, she was stunned. She hadn't meant to start anything, but something about that night had resonated deeper than she expected. In standing her ground, she hadn't just defended herself, she'd given a voice to thousands who'd long been told to keep theirs down. And for the first time, the world seemed ready to listen. Victor Langford's PR team scrambled. First came a half-hearted statement, a vague apology without a name, framed as a misunderstanding. But the internet wasn't buying it. Within days, former employees began sharing their own stories. Assistants, drivers, even a former executive, each with their own version of the same theme: arrogance, entitlement, humiliation behind closed doors. Zarya's moment had cracked open a dam, and now the flood wouldn't stop. Meanwhile, Alouette saw an unexpected shift. Instead of fallout, they got fully booked nights, supportive notes left with reservations, and customers tipping double, sometimes triple, just to say thank you. Management quietly increased Zarya's hours. Her co-workers treated her differently now, not just with respect, but with a kind of quiet awe. Even the chef, who rarely looked up from his line, gave her a rare smile and a nod. Brands began reaching out, from small coffee shops to major media outlets, all wanting a quote or a campaign tie-in. But Zarya turned it all down. This wasn't about going viral or cashing in. It was about something that couldn't be bought. Langford, meanwhile, canceled his upcoming appearances. Investors began pulling back. His name started to carry a different weight, not prestige, but scrutiny. And in quiet corners of boardrooms and break rooms alike, people started having different conversations about power, respect, and the price of silence. It wasn't justice in the legal sense, but it was justice all the same. Zarya stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing the last of the dinner plates as the hum of the city buzzed softly beyond her apartment window. Her little brother, Malik, sat at the table, sketching dancers in his notebook with the same focus she once had as a girl. The TV was muted, but she recognized the image flickering on the screen. The clip of her standing tall in that restaurant, the line that had echoed far beyond the velvet chairs and white linen. She hadn't asked for any of it. All she'd wanted that night was to do her job, collect her tips, and get home in time to help Malik with his science project. But when pushed to the edge, when disrespected one time too many, something inside her rose up. Not out of anger, but out of self-worth. She dried her hands, leaned against the counter, and watched Malik smile to himself as he drew. That was what mattered, that he could grow up seeing his sister speak the truth, seeing that you didn't have to be loud to be powerful. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe more reporters, maybe quiet again. But for now, in this small kitchen filled with warmth and worn-out linoleum, Zarya finally felt like she'd reclaimed something no paycheck had ever given her. Her voice. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to stay silent. Zarya didn't set out to be anyone's symbol, didn't rehearse a speech or plan a moment. She simply stood her ground when someone with money and influence tried to step on her dignity. In doing so, she reminded the world of a truth we often forget, that no amount of wealth gives a person the right to treat someone else as less. Respect isn't earned through status. It's shown in the smallest choices, the quietest tones, and the way we treat people when no one's watching. Her story hit a nerve because it wasn't just about her. It was about all of us. Anyone who's ever had to bite their tongue, swallow their pride, and smile through the sting. But it also showed that even one voice, when clear and steady, can change the temperature of a room. So the next time you feel small, the next time someone tries to make you forget your worth, remember this: you don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is one sentence. If this story moved you, share it. Pass it along to someone who needs the reminder. Because decency can't be bought, but it can be passed on. And maybe, just maybe, that's how change begins.